Chapter 3. Towards the Idea of Pakistan. Forts, tombs and mosques summed up the presence of the Mughals in West Pakistan, for R.E.M. Wheeler. These markers of conquest and conviction have created a physical landscape that is aesthetically awe-inspiring as well as spiritually soothing. At the same time, they are provocative and politicized in both the shared and partitioned history of the subcontinent, where from the 11th to the 18th century, Buddhism migrated, Sikhism manifested, Hinduism strengthened, and Islam became established. Above all, culturally, it was this period that produced a protracted, hybridized composite Indo-Islamic identity, in the words of its eminent chronicler, Richard M. Eaton, which was to be at stake in the politics of the mid-20th century. From Delhi Sultanate to the Mughals. Being near the northwestern frontier and the southeastern extremity, Punjab and Sindh, respectively, always remained vulnerable to ambitious neighbours from all directions. In the north, Lahore was at the heart of incursions and conquests, a situation which only changed with the third Mamluk king, Iltutmish, who reigned between 1211 and 1236, who shifted the seat of political power in the region to Delhi. One of the byproducts of shifting power to Delhi from Lahore was that it rendered Lahore relatively unimportant for the succeeding 2 centuries. Power instead shifted to places such as Dipalpur and Multan, which emerged as cultural and commercial centres, while Ajudhan, present-day Pakpatan, found eminence as the seat of the Sufi mystic Baba Farid, 1173 to 1266. Multan was at times associated more with Sindh, with its Sufi mystic cult of Lal Shahbaz Qalandar, 1177 to 1274, than with Punjab, and this is reflected in its Multani dialect and its Uch market. To pick up the historical tapestry from slightly before where it was left in the last chapter, Mahmud of Ghazni's raids into the northwest and southwest of the subcontinent between 1001 and 1025 are today either celebrated in Pakistan or condemned in India. Both sides forget that these are emotions and traditions manufactured by the English East India Company and its successor, British Raj, in the mid-19th century. These were colonial attempts to make and write the history of the region they were starting to rule. The Ghaznavid dynasty was of Turkic origin and ruled from Lahore until the arrival of the Ghurids, who conquered Lahore in 1186 and reached Delhi by 1206. The Ghurids were of Persian descent and began the percolation of Persian cultural and linguistic influences into the subcontinent. Centuries later, in 1987, the Pakistani military gave a nod to their memory by naming its medium-range missiles Ghuri 1-3, after Sultan Muhammad Ghuri. The period that followed is collectively referred to as the Delhi Sultanate. Ruling from Delhi, 5 Turkic Afghan dynasties, the Mamluk dynasty, 1206 to 1290, the Khalji dynasty, 1290 to 1320, the Tughlaq dynasty, 1320 to 1414, the Sayyid dynasty, 1414 to 1451, and the Lodi dynasty, 1451 to 1526, ruled over extensive parts of the subcontinent from 1206 to 1526. It is during this period that we start to see increasing cultural synthesis and the emergence of an Indo-Islamic civilization, reflected in monuments and language from the lofty heights of the Qutb Minar minaret, named after the founder of the Delhi Sultanate Qutb-ud-Din Aibak, and now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, to the development of the grassroots vernacular of Hindustani, Hindu-Urdu, in the Deccan plains of north and central India. Attached to the royal court of Alauddin Khalji, who ruled between 1296 and 1316, the poet-musician Amir Khusro, considered the father of Urdu Hindavi literature, began fusing together Indo-Persian influences, weaving them through mystic, devotional poetry. Urdu was ultimately to become the rallying voice of the Pakistan movement of the early 20th century. By the mid-14th century, the Moroccan scholar Ibn Battuta, 1304 to 1377, was also speaking of the Delhi Sultanate of the Tughlaqs as an Indo-Islamic empire of Hind and Sind, yet again echoing unconsciously a variation of the two-region theme. But it was not until the rulers who have collectively come to be known as the Great Mughals established their power that Indo-Islamic culture received state patronage and took root in the subcontinent. Babur Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad, 1483 to 1530, a descendant of the Mongol Genghis Khan, 1162 to 1227, and the founder of the Timurid dynasty, Timur or Tamerlane, 1336 to 1405, came first, marching across the Punjab to take Lahore in 1524. 2 years later, in the Battle of Panipat, present-day Haryana, India, he defeated the Lodi forces and heralded Mughal control of North India. What followed was a reign of nearly 200 years by the Great Mughals, ending with Aurangzeb in 1707. Humayun succeeded his father Babur in 1530, but his rule was punctuated by Sher Shah Suri, a Pashtun ruling from his kingdom based in Sasaram, Bihar, India, and famed for his building of the Grand Trunk Road. It was Humayun's son, Akbar, who ruled between 1556 and 1605, who earned the sobriquet, the Great, for being a conqueror of territories, consolidator of states, and creator of a syncretic and pacifist culture, of Din-e-Ilahi, a multi-faith religion, and Sulh-e-Kul, peace and reconciliation. He went through the Punjab and up the Khyber Pass to capture Kabul in 1586, moved his capital to Lahore that year until 1598, and again traversed the Punjab, journeying down the Indus to capture Sindh in 1591. Thus, from the Hindu Kush Mountains to the Arabian Sea, once again an attempt was made to systematize, centralize, and hybridize the state over these multi-ethnic religious societies by carving out subas, provinces, and laying the foundation of colonial and present-day provinces. At its pinnacle, Akbar's subcontinental empire saw a great patronage of art, craft, and architecture. Jahangir, who ruled between 1605 and 1627, followed his father Akbar to the throne and was, temperamentally, better suited to the dexterity and insight required for the arts than to court politics. In popular imagination, he is better remembered as Salim through his legendary tragic love affair with Anarkali, a Mughal courtesan from Lahore. There is an equally famous Anarkali Bazaar there. The more substantial, if not scandalous, relationship was with his wife, Nur Jahan, 1577 to 1645, who was a widow when Jahangir married her and who earned his complete confidence in his last years, to the extent that she emerged in her own right as an empress and had coins minted in her name in 1627. Both Nur Jahan and Jahangir are buried not too far from each other in the city of Lahore, today serving only to attract the occasional tourist. The reign of Jahangir's fourth son, Shah Jahan, lasted 30 years, 1628 to 1658, and this period was the zenith of Mughal architecture, producing mighty and beautiful structures in a new Indo-Persian Saracenic style. The Red Fort and Jama Masjid in Delhi, the Taj Mahal in Agra, and Wazir Khan's Mosque and Shalimar Gardens in Lahore all capture the political ability of the Mughals to penetrate all aspects of life. On the military front, expansionism and retreat went hand in hand during this time, and the Mughals' Afghan territories were lost in the 1640s. Henceforth, the Attock Fort on the Indus became the de facto outpost of subcontinental influence towards West and Central Asia. Aurangzeb, who ruled between 1658 and 1707, was the next and last of the great Mughals. He sought pragmatically to pacify the Pashtun tribes beyond the Khyber, and with good reason. In 1667, a Yusufzai chieftain of the Swat Valley, and in 1672, the Afridis, Pashtun tribe, rose in rebellion. Following this, in 1674 to 1675, Aurangzeb spent a year in the Peshawar region, winning over tribes, stabilizing the northwest frontier, and leaving a blueprint that would be followed by the British Indian and Pakistani states alike. The later part of Aurangzeb's reign saw him clash with communities like the Sikhs under Guru Tegh Bahadur, 1621 to 1675, and Guru Gobind Singh, 1666 to 1708, in the Punjab. Aurangzeb's political ambitions, combined with his personal piety, which saw him endow the grand Badshahi Masjid in Lahore, one of modern Pakistan's most iconic structures, translated into a classic case of imperial overreach, and led to the decline of this dynasty. Sufis and Sikhs. When India and Pakistan were created in August 1947, it was the Sikhs who suffered the spiritual division of their faith. Through the medieval period, with the establishment of Islam on the one hand and increasing alienation with the Brahmanical order on the other, the Punjab region had changed considerably, and these conditions saw the advent of a new religion. Nanak, 1469 to 1539, born in Talwandi, present-day Nankana Sahib, Punjab, Pakistan, preached a new type of message. It was partly born out of the Bhakti, devotional movement, which rejected the rigidity and compartmentalization that both Islam and Hinduism preached. Fearlessly anti-Brahmanical, it found resonance among people in the region and established a following. The Bhakti movement had arrived to meet and mingle with the mystic Sufis, and together both set about challenging their respective orthodoxies like never before. Personal and popular, direct and simple, poetic and spoken or sung, these movements appeared across regions in different vernaculars. Distancing himself from both Hindu and Islamic traditions, systems and institutions, Nanak settled down at Kartarpur, present-day Punjab, Pakistan, on the banks of the river Ravi, and preached upon the importance of meditating in the name of God, but at the same time maintaining a family and community life, as opposed to becoming a renouncer. The fluid cultural milieu of early Mughal Punjab permeates the pages of the early Sikh sacred text, Adi Granth. It includes the devotional verses and hymns of many poets, saints and Sufis, cutting across religious boundaries, whose names are familiar across the northern part of the subcontinent, names such as Surdar, who died in 1573, Kabir, who died circa 1518, Namdev, who died circa 1350, and Ravidas, who died in 1540, as well as Baba Farid. The growth of the Sikh faith occurred against the backdrop of the rise of the Mughals, and this led to confrontations. While Akbar had cordial patron relationships with Nanak's successors, it was with Jahangir that Sikh-Mughal relations started to decline. The fifth Guru, Arjan, 1581 to 1606, gave refuge to the emperor's rebellious son, Khusro, and Jahangir ordered his execution. It was, however, with the ordering of the execution of the ninth Guru, Tegh Bahadur, 1664 to 1675, that Aurangzeb set in motion a fateful clash with the 10th and final Guru, Gobind Singh. During the chaotic period that followed the death of Aurangzeb, Punjab witnessed the decline of Mughal influence and the rise of the Sikhs as strong contenders for political dominance in the region, which eventually led to the establishment of the first Sikh kingdom in Lahore, under the leadership of the young Ranjit Singh in 1801. This was the pinnacle of Sikh political power, which declined following the death of Ranjit Singh in 1839. Interestingly, and not without controversy, The legacy of Ranjit Singh has been resurrected in Lahore in recent years, including the inauguration of a statue of him as a true son of the soil in 2019, an example of a reassertion of regional identity over religious affiliation. On the other side of Punjab is Sindh, a sleepy backwater in comparison to the Pathan frontier, but, as historian Sarah Ansari observes, a world of wadaros, sardars and pirs, feudal landlords, tribal chiefs, and Sufi saints. The province of Sindh has the largest number of Hindus in Pakistan today, with a significant number of followers who are Nanak-Panthis, followers of Nanak. A strong characteristic of these regions is the ways in which the institutionalized faith coexists alongside informal allegiances to Sufis, pirs, and gurus. Collectively, Punjab and Sindh saw a rising Muslim piety under charismatic Sufi sheikhs, teachers, and their orders, with two key names of the 13th century being those of Baba Farid in western Punjab and Bahauddin Zakaria, who died in 1267 in southern Punjab. These Persianate Sufis, together with the Persian wheel, used to lift water in farming, set the towns of Punjab on their way to becoming the region's breadbasket, with a rich local identity. A century later, under Firuz Shah Tughlaq, who ruled between 1351 and 1388, Punjab would see the first of its major phases of canal construction from its many rivers, thereby further expanding cultivation and settlement. This was in stark contrast to Sindh, where pastoral communities were suffering from famine in the 13th century. Much of this region would later witness vast social engineering, which began innocuously in 1831. Alexander Burnes, 1805 to 1841, a young political agent of the East India Company, led a mission from near the mouth of the Indus in Sindh, navigating one of its tributaries, Ravi, to reach Lahore. The stated aim was to take a gift of 5 horses from King William IV to Ranjit Singh. It was played as an opportunity to build alliances, but the real reason behind the expedition was to map the river Indus and its tributaries. This was a precursor to the company annexing first Sindh, 1843, and then Punjab, 1849. A far cry from its humble beginnings during Jahangir's reign as seeker of Mughal seals for maritime trade in the Indian peninsula. Within half a century, Punjab would see canalization and formation of canal colonies by the British state on an unprecedented scale, and in another 2 decades, the region would pay its gratitude and debt in blood by contributing well over 100,000 soldiers to the British war effort of the First World War. Both India and Pakistan, much like the colonial state, have employed these historical periods selectively, exclusively, and separately as a political football to chronicle a divided religious history to feed into the creation of 2 separate nation-states. In doing so, they have either rendered invisible the indivisible cultural connects of a shared syncretic literature, or ignored cultural figures, as opposed to men of state. Thus, in addition to those mentioned earlier, figures such as the poet Waris Shah, 1722 to 1798, composer of the love ballad Heer Ranjha, and Bulla Shah, 1680 to 1757 in Punjab, and Shah Abdul Latif, 1689 to 1752, and Sachal Samast, 1739 to 1827, their Sindhi counterparts, remain important reminders of the rich interaction between 2 regions deeply influenced by the linguistic worlds of both Persian and Sanskrit, whose fruit was the Indo-Islamic Urdu or Hindustani, and, at the same time, strong regional outpourings in local vernacular folklore. Seeds of Dissent. In the aftermath of the Great Mughals, a number of successors continued to rule in their shrinking, fragmented form between 1707 and 1857, relinquishing power to their regional commanders, or subadars, and losing the battle against the new imperialist rising and expanding in the region, the British. Their East India Company had received the Royal Charter in 1600, during the last days of Akbar, but the relationship that was cultivated during Jahangir's period was completely severed when the descendants of this Mughal dynasty, under British custody since 1803, were brutally and retributively killed following the recapture of Shah Jahanabad, Old Delhi, in 1857 by British officers. The last king, Bahadur Shahasava, was exiled and died in Rangoon in 1862, and with that ended the subcontinent's long association with the Mughals. The baton of power now passed on to the British Crown, which took over direct control following the revolt of the sepoys in 1857, which had broadened to other sections of society and spread from Calcutta to Delhi. The sepoy mutiny lasted for almost a year and cast a long and dark shadow over British rule in India, with constant fear of rebellion and treachery. Following from it, the British officials began collecting census data in the 1870s, which classified and categorized people, and thus began to entrench communal identities that would ultimately lead to the creation of India and Pakistan. Whether one sees the uprising against the East India Company in 1857 as a mere sepoy mutiny, or a peasant feudal rebellion, or nothing short of the First War of Independence, the point is that it forms a rupture, in the aftermath of which we begin to see a first wave of the vilification of the Muslim other by the British. The new colonial power was keen to suppress any rekindling of sympathies for the outgoing Mughals, a feeling that was reignited during the days leading up to the rebellion. The Muslim community, dubbed as Phantom Wahhabi, were especially targeted and treated with suspicion. Further, the British had already established and harnessed their relationship with the rising Hindu middle class in the colonial cities of Calcutta, Bengal, Madras, and Bombay, which were the first 3 presidencies in the establishment of British rule in India. In the wake of this existential crisis, the Muslims of North India had to reinvent themselves from belonging to the ruling community to not merely being ruled, but minoritized and victimized. It is in this moment that one spots introspection and divergent paths being laid out, paths which would ultimately lead to the formation of 2 sovereign countries from a multitude of princely states and British-controlled provinces. In that space of soul-searching upon the changing power dynamics among the major communities of the subcontinent, there was much discussion within and between them around how to respond. Some collaborated with the ruling power, others retreated, but among the North Indian Muslims, for rather a long time, there was little appetite to embrace the new Western education espoused by colonialists like Thomas Babington Macaulay in his infamous Minute on Education of 1835, which set out to form a class of persons Indian in blood and colour, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. William Hunter, a Scottish historian and member of the Indian Civil Service, wrote the book Indian Mussalmans in 1871. With a focus on Bengal, the book attempts to understand a class whom successive governments have declared to be a source of permanent danger to the Indian Empire. Elaborating, he directly addresses this in a chapter entitled The Wrongs of the Mussalmans Under British Rule. Almost forgotten today, Hunter was, at one time, considered both the forebear of Muslim separatism and an emblem of the British policy of divide and rule. 4 years after Hunter's report was published, the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College was established, which would become the Aligarh Muslim University by 1920 and emerge as the cradle of the Pakistan movement. The establishment of the college by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, 1817 to 1898, was a pivotal moment in the awakening of Indian Muslims, as it became the spiritual and rationalist homeland for the Muslim separatist cause. As early as 1887 to 1888, in a series of speeches, Sir Syed emphatically and controversially contemplated the consequences of what India would look like after the British left. Suppose that all English were to leave India. Who would be rulers? Is it possible that two nations, the Mohammedans and the Hindus, could sit on the same throne and remain equal in power? Most certainly not. To hope that both could remain equal is to desire the impossible and the inconceivable. In trying to understand the emergence of the idea of Pakistan, the late 19th century is crucial in creating these increasingly confrontational, totalizing identities of Hindus and Muslims. Intellectually, the impetus for these rudimentary ideas was being debated and refined by scholars such as Sayyid Amir Ali, author of Spirit of Islam, 1891, and Maulana Altaf Hussain Hali. Written on the request of Sayyid Ahmed Khan, Hali's Masadas-e-Mad-o-Jaseri Islam, The Ebb and Tide of Islam, published 1879, is considered one of the earliest poetic articulations of creating a Muslim nation. The Urdu poem Masadas, written in the aftermath of the 1857 rebellion, charts the rise and fall of Islamic civilization in world history. Around the same time, in 1882, Anandamath, The Abbey of Bliss, by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, was published but banned by the British. The novel led the Bengali literary renaissance and was part of an aggressive Hindu revivalism, but crucially, it was the nationalist movement's adoption of the idolizing song in the novel Vande Mataram, Praise to Thee, Mother, that caused dissent between the communities. Set in the backdrop of the famine of 1770, the novel depicts Hindu Bengali nationalism against the Muslim Nawab of Bengal, who is seen to be in collusion with the British. Late 19th century British India was also a time of rapid socio-economic change, and one in which the British had both racially retreated from and yet powerfully penetrated deeper into Indian society. British legal and constitutional laws began to permeate into wider society, while the British maintained their separate lives in hill stations or cantonments. There were winners and losers. Competition for resources was stiff, and increasingly a climate of widening communal tension between different religious communities took hold. By 1905, there was a widening rift between Hindus and Muslims on issues like language, Hindu versus Urdu, and cow slaughter, both of which caused major riots in the 1880s and 1890s. These issues contributed towards the decision of Viceroy Curzon to partition the province of Bengal into a Muslim-majority east and a Hindu-majority west. The administrative rationale offered for this partition was reversed in 1911, but by then the seeds of separation had sprouted. A rival to the Indian National Congress, INC, established in 1885, had been formed, blessed by Curzon's successor, Minto, to represent the disenchanted voices amongst the Muslim elite. The All India Muslim League, AIML, formed in 1906, successfully negotiated with Minto for separate electorates in the newly expanded legislative councils under the 1909 Morley-Minto reforms. The separate electorates were reserved seats in which only Muslims would be polled and elected. The idea, whilst protecting Muslim interests electorally and legislatively, entrenched the notion of a socially separate minority community or communities. Social and economic division was now firmly embedded in the political and constitutional framework endorsed by the colonial power. The Khilafat movement, 1919 to 1923, temporarily brought together Indian nationalists in support of restoring the authority of the Ottoman Caliphate following the end of the First World War. The Congress League Lucknow Pact of 1916 saw a brief period in which the Congress agreed to the principle of separate electorates for Muslims in exchange for working towards full Indian autonomy. This collaboration between the Congress and the League, between leading figures in the Caliphate movement, Begum Amam Bibi, and her sons Muhammad and Shaukat Ali and Mohandas Gandhi, was an alliance of convenience more than anything else. It, however, paved the way for a non-cooperation movement in the wake of the continued agitation following the massacre in Amritsar in 1919, in which General Dyer ordered troops to fire at an unarmed crowd enclosed in the gardens of Jallianwala Bagh, which resulted in the death of 379 people officially, but many more unofficially. A fine reward for all the fighting that the Punjabis had done for king and another country, as Shabani Basu explores in her book on Indian soldiers on the Western Front. Through these muddy waters emerged two figures who would dominate the politics of the subcontinent for the next 30 years, Gandhi and Jinnah. Both Gujarati barristers by training, constitutionalists by temperament, and nationalists by character, who would eventually part ways and lead their people into two dominions, two destinies. The caliphate rug for Hindu-Muslim unity was anyway pulled from under its feet when Ataturk's Turkey abolished the caliphate in 1924. There now followed a decade of sharp deterioration in interfaith relations, with some of the first violent manifestations of communal rioting that would symbolize 1947. The interwar period saw a gathering momentum behind the INC's mass freedom movement, simultaneous political devolution by the colonial state, and persisting question marks, misgivings about the consequences of British departure and Congress, Hindu rule across provinces, with the fear that Muslims, and not only them, would be relegated as the poor other. Caste, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar. Ethnicity, Erode Venkatappa Ramaswamy. And class, Communist Party of India, established 1925, were all carved out as markers of separate spaces and opportunities in the political sphere, but none proved to be as powerful as religion. The Pakistan Movement. Growing out of the landed gentry across North and East India, the League found its greatest inspiration in Sir Allama Muhammad Iqbal, 1877 to 1938. Born in Sialkot to Kashmiri parents, educated in Lahore, Cambridge and Munich, and influenced by the poetry of Rumi, Iqbal put aside his academic and legal careers to write famous Urdu poems such as Shikwa, Jawabe Shikwa, Complaint, Answer to the Complaint. When elected as the AIML president in 1930, he delivered his aforementioned prophetic political speech on a Muslim India within India. The formation of a consolidated Northwest Indian Muslim state appeared to him to be the final destiny of the Muslims of Northwest India. 3 years after this speech by the spiritual father of Pakistan, Chaudhry Ramit Ali, 1897 to 1951, a young law student at the University of Cambridge, coined the term Pakistan, Punjab, frontier, Afghan province, Kashmir, Sindh, Balochistan, in his pamphlet, which was delivered to the delegates at the Third Round Table Conference in London in 1931 to 1932, that was to consider the future government of India. These formulations would coalesce in Jinnah's address and the League's resolution at Lahore in 1940. The Lahore resolution became the linchpin of the Pakistan movement, even though the word Pakistan was not mentioned in it. Historians remain divided on how to interpret it, and for Aisha Jalal, this bargaining counter did not irrevocably commit itself to the idea of a separation of land and transfer of population. Nevertheless, it became a decisive clarion call in the final cry for Muslim separate nationalism over 1946 to 1947. So, what had changed in those few short years? To begin with, the political climate in the provinces, with the coming of the Government of India Act 1935, which provided the constitutional blueprint for independent Pakistan till 1956. The franchise was expanded, and the system of diarchy furthered. In the 1936 to 1937 elections, the INC performed well, winning across the board and leaving the AIML to wonder why it failed to connect with the Indian Muslims, especially where they were a majority population, in Punjab, Bengal, Sindh, NWFP, and Assam. In the two largest of these 5 provinces, Punjab and Bengal, which would go on to become the base of 2 independent nations, Pakistan in 1947 and Bangladesh in 1971, regional markers and class politics reigned in these interwar years. However, the Congress rule from 1937 to 1939 in 8 out of 11 provinces served to provide a taste of what a majoritarian state bureaucracy felt like, and thus gave a fillip to the League's efforts in the subsequent half-decade. From 1939 to 1945, the events of the Second World War took over, wherein the Congress refused to cooperate with the British unless assured of independence immediately, while the League supported the war effort. A grateful colonial power seized upon this split, and, while putting the entire Congress leadership behind bars for almost 3 years, promoted the League, thereby killing any possibility of a united nationalist movement. These years proved critical for the League's political prospects, as it won over the regional Muslim leaderships of the Punjab, from where 60% of the soldiers of the British Indian Army came by now, and which would be key in the partition negotiations. By the winter of 1945 to 1946, when another round of elections to central and provincial legislatures, sometimes called a referendum on Pakistan, were held, results confirmed this shift in opinion, as the AIML won all Muslim reserved seats in the Central Assembly, while forming the governments in Bengal and Sindh. After tortuous negotiations over the prospect of a 3-tier united India, Hindu provinces, Muslim provinces, and princely states, with a federal centre and constitution, the call for strength and thereby separation, immediate freedom and not protracted unity, proved too strong for the Congress, the League, and the by now desperate to decolonize British state. Ironically, the 2 regions or provinces to be partitioned were Punjab, which was again the province most involved in British war efforts, and Bengal, which had suffered the most because of these war efforts, which led to its famine of 1943 to 1944. No side, however, could foresee that the progress towards political freedom would dissolve into the insanity of mayhem, migration, and mass murder witnessed in August 1947. The Pakistan movement's most rigorous historian, Ayesha Jalal, asked in the mid-1990s, how did a Pakistan come about that served the interests of so many Muslims of the subcontinent so little? Perhaps this was in response to the then President General Zia-ul-Haq's pronouncement that if you took Islam out of Pakistan, it would collapse. But the question that predates Jalal's is, how and why did the large Muslim populations of Punjab, Sindh, and Bengal, all between 50% and 70%, contribute so little and so late to specific and separate Muslim politics? Instead, at the forefront of Muslim politics were the so-called UP Muslims, a mere 14% of the population of that province, but providing the roadmap for Pakistan. This emergence of Muslim separatism, real and imagined, in North India is a first-order fact to be grasped in any introduction to the present-day Pakistan. In trying to theorize and understand this incongruence of people and politics, historian Francis Robinson's pioneering work on separatism among Indian Muslims is important. He examines 4 possibilities. First, Muslim backwardness since the Mutiny of 1857, produced by British discrimination against them as a punishment for their part in the mutiny. Second, British divide and rule policy, breaking up the composite, syncretic, subcontinental culture. Third, Hindu revivalism in the garb of Indian nationalism, driving the Muslims to organize politically as a community. And finally, Indian Muslims as a separate entity since the days of Muhammad bin Qasim, with the creation of Pakistan an acknowledgement of this ever-present manifestation. That all these explanations share the assumption that Indian Muslims were a group whose situation, outlook and interests were generally the same should be noted, alongside the realization that this was not borne out in the behavior of Balochis, Sindhis, Punjabis, Pashtuns and Bengalis, who, until almost the last stages, were ambivalent about Muslim separatism. The great irony of the Pakistan movement is thus that the old Muslim centres such as Aligarh, Dhaka, and Lucknow that were at the forefront of educational and organisational change are not in fact part of modern Pakistan. Moreover, Muslims that make up Pakistan today had organised their politics around non-communal lines, and the communal basis that it has held since 1947 emerged later. These incongruities and differing aspirations amongst the Muslims of India are borne out in many respects. Jinnah was no clearer than anyone else about what his new, imagined homeland would look like. The creation of Pakistan was supposed to provide a single, peaceful political solution to the question of the self-determination of Muslims in British India. The reality was much more complex, because Muslims were scattered all over the 11 provinces of British India, and were in a simple, numerical majority in only 4 of them. The rest, short of getting up and going to Pakistan, were to be locked in a deadly sacrificial relationship between a Hindu-majority India and a Muslim-saturated Pakistan. Not every Indian Muslim in the days leading up to independence wanted to be part of that separate political project. Indeed, the 1951 census of Pakistan enumerates 7.2 million people as displaced persons, migrants from India, the majority located in West Pakistan. According to the 1951 census of India, 34 million, or 10% of the population, were Muslims, indicating that more chose to remain than migrate. Furthermore, alongside British India, there existed over 550 princely states, semi-autonomous and indirectly ruled from Delhi, which comprised 1/3 of the land and 1/4 of the population. They were theoretically independent when British paramountcy ended in 1947, but realistically had no chance of exercising that choice. Their integration in either of the independent dominions has been called a bloodless revolution by historian Ian Copland, but it was a combination of bribery, chicanery, skullduggery with persuasion, coercion, and in cases like Hyderabad, Junagadh and Jammu, and Kashmir, outright bloody annexation, leaving bitter legacies. The princely states that acceded to Pakistan, though smaller in number, were no less problematic, and accession and integration was a long drawn-out affair, as historian Yaqub Khan Bangash has detailed. Understanding contemporary conflicts in Balochistan also requires an appreciation of its history vis-à-vis the accession of the Khanate of Kalat. Birth of Pakistan. The final, frantic days of British rule saw Indian politicians at the helm in a short-lived coalition, the interim government, before the clouds parted and partition appeared, with Mountbatten the last viceroy. The fate of millions was decided by drawing a line on a map through the east and the west of the subcontinent, approximating to the Muslim-majority areas in western Punjab and eastern Bengal. Those caught in these widening communal cracks fell mercilessly. Pakistan was born out of this political endgame in which a colonial power wanted to avoid being embroiled in a long and bitter civil war and was looking for a quick exit, while the 2 main political parties were equally eager to grab their share of pie as the only solution to the constitutional deadlock. In his haste to leave, Mountbatten brought forward British departure from June 1948 to August 1947 and announced it on the 3rd of June, leaving 72 days to undo a presence of 97 years in Punjab and 190 years in Bengal. The boundaries were drawn by the lawyer Cyril Radcliffe, flown in from the UK and asked to be swift, in the 5 weeks leading to British withdrawal. The boundary line was not made public until 3 days after the transfer of power at midnight on the 14th to 15th of August, for fear of people's response. This ill-conceived and ill-planned birth of Pakistan and independence of India created such a bittersweet moment that the trajectories of simultaneous celebrations and mourning can be traced to this day. For Pakistan, this emergence was especially challenging, because not only was it a newly created nation-state, but everything had to be effectively set up from scratch. Moreover, while Jinnah achieved his life's calling, it was not quite the Pakistan he had expected. Instead, it was a Pakistan split into eastern and western wings, separated by 1,000 miles of what became hostile Indian territory. He would term it a mutilated, moth-eaten Pakistan. On the 14th of August 1947, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was in Karachi, alongside Viceroy Mountbatten, welcoming a new dawn of freedom, engulfed in the fear and flames of communal violence. The worst of this occurred in the partitioned province of the Punjab in North India, where from March 1947 onwards, in Rawalpindi, communal violence and forced migration of people completely changed the landscape. Over the next year, but largely concentrated in August to December 1947, approximately 1 million people were massacred, and over 15 million were forced to leave from one side of the Radcliffe Line to the other. Bengal in East India, the other province to be partitioned, experienced all this in slow motion over almost 25 years. Other provinces in the newly created Pakistan, like Sindh and the NWFP, also saw religious riots and exchanges of refugee populations, but remained dwarfed in this narrative because the focus was dominated by the two borders of the new nations, cutting through two old regions. The departing as well as the incoming authorities were unprepared for that moment when people would have to unceremoniously unmix centuries of intermingling and living together. There was no blueprint for the migration of people who were forced to flee their homes due to the fear of violence that was spiraling out of control. This fear only highlighted the lack of preparedness of the authorities. The partition and the momentous task of dealing with the refugee crisis was particularly acute in Pakistan, because in some areas the refugee population notably outnumbered the local population, with consequences for both. The unequal exchange of people affected Pakistan and India unequally, and proved a bigger burden on the former's much smaller and more fragile state apparatus. Pakistan inherited a state that was structurally weak, but with a strong military, and this would have implications in the years to come. But for now, it had to pick up the pieces and put together a new nation. Chapter 4. Consolidation and Fragmentation. Ever since Pakistan was created, the pendulum for governing the country has swung between democracy and military rule on the one hand, and secular state and religious state on the other. Was it a case of insufficient imagination, or was it just unrealistic? For the democratically elected rulers, it has always been a case of holding on to power, given that the army has played and continues to play a crucial role behind the scenes. The consequence has been a weakening and erosion of institutional structures, party politics, and the public sphere, and conversely, strengthening of the army. As is often said, nations have armies, but the Pakistani army has a nation. The strength of the army has been further consolidated by a civil bureaucracy of client-patron networks. Taken together, the army-bureaucracy nexus forms the cornerstone of Pakistan, as an Islamic nation-state. Some of this, such as the civil and military officialdom, is furniture inherited from the former colonial power. Other aspects, such as the spreading tentacles of religious organizations, patronized and promoted, have grown in the post-colonial milieu. The generals as saviors. In early 1949, Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan put forward the Objectives Resolution for Pakistan's new constitution, in which sovereignty, first and foremost, lay with Allah. A rather stunning about-turn from Jinnah's quoted words of mid-August 1947. 7 years and 4 prime ministers later, the first constitution was proclaimed in March 1956 and cemented Pakistan's transformation from Jinnah's undefined but secular vision to an Islamic republic. The passage of this time had less to do with drafting the clauses, many of which, as in neighbouring India, were borrowed from the Government of India Act 1935. It owed much more to the persisting political instability, especially since Liaquat was assassinated in October 1951. By October 1958, the government was taken over by a military coup, ushering in the first of 4 military dictators. In all, between them, the 4 generals turned presidents, Ayub Khan, 1958 to 1969, Yahya Khan, 1969 to 1971, Zia-ul-Haq, 1977 to 1988, and Pervez Musharraf, 1999 to 2008, ruled Pakistan for almost 35 years, that is, half of its existence. Even when not in power, the military has certainly controlled the strings in the background, never more so than in this last democratic decade, 2008 onwards. These years of rule by technocrats, bureaucrats and generals have all left an imprint on Pakistan, shaping and manipulating its identity to ensure that power and wealth remain concentrated in their hands. Another key feature is that whether it is Cold War politics, Islamization in the Zia period, or the War on Terror under Musharraf's regime, all served to ultimately strengthen the military establishment, and all have been endorsed by considerable U.S. financial support. Indeed, when in the late 1970s the Jimmy Carter administration offered $400 million in assistance to Pakistan, Zia famously rejected this, calling the amount peanuts, and in the next decade helped funnel the Ronald Reagan administration's $1 billion+ to the Afghan Mujahids, religious warriors. Following the War on Terror, aid to Pakistan increased 11-fold to $2 billion in 2002, and the country became the 3rd largest recipient of U.S. military training and assistance during the Bush-Obama era. U.S. aid to Pakistan has dramatically declined since the election of President Trump. In 2013, for the first time, Pakistan transitioned formally from one elected government to another, breaking the pattern of alternating between elections and coups. Underneath this chronic instability was the fragmentation of the All India Muslim League as it sought to reinvent itself as the Pakistan Muslim League in 1947. The party struggled to transition from being the torchbearer of a movement to becoming the party of a government in a regionalized, plural political setup. Organizationally weak, since its establishment by an elite in 1906, it was a party of landlords, aristocrats, businessmen, and intelligentsia, but scarcely that of the peasant, the artisan, the trader, the worker, or the soldier. Its strong showing in Muslim constituencies in 1945 to 1946 elections, in a limited franchise, counted for little in the post-1947 consolidation of the public sphere in Punjab, Bengal, Sindh, NWFP, and Balochistan, provinces where it had been a latecomer. This, in turn, showed up its fragility and insecurity as it sought to adapt to the power-sharing that was required in order to stabilize the partitioned provinces. The rot began at the top, where an ailing and old Jinnah assumed, unwisely perhaps, the unelected role of Governor-General and President of the First Constituent Assembly. In doing so, he usurped the place of the elected role with a ceremonial role. In any case, the Qaid-i-Azam died in September 1948, within 13 months of Pakistan's formation, while his longtime deputy, Liaquat, was assassinated in public 3 years later. Thus, with the two founding fathers lost in its formative years, high politics in Pakistan resulted in what the historian Ian Talbot calls a game of musical chairs at the top, played between the civil bureaucracy, military officials, and professional politicians, against a backdrop of the developing Cold War and its packed politics in the early 1950s. Anxiety and lack of faith in democratic institutions was visible almost from the beginning. Jinnah had dismissed the chief minister of NWFP, Khan Abdul Jabbar Khan, popularly known as Dr. Khan Sahib. He was the elder brother of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, famous as Frontier Gandhi, for his non-violent leadership of the anti-colonial resistance movement Khodai Khidmatgars. Also known as Surkh Posh, or the Red Shirts, they were a social reform organization that gradually turned to politics and, in coalition with the Congress, formed a ministry in NWFP in 1937 and 1946. They were staunchly against the partition plan, which the Congress accepted without consulting them, thus betraying the long-term association with the Khan brothers. The referendum in July 1947 in NWFP was supposed to end the anomaly of a Muslim-majority province with a Congress government and provide the people with a say on whether they should join Pakistan. They voted in favor of Pakistan overwhelmingly, but it was boycotted by the Khodai Khidmatgar members. They were branded traitors and Indian sympathizers and punished by successive governments in Pakistan. Theirs was a poignant consequence of the peculiarity of partitioning a complex public sphere along a single axis, that of religion. Jinnah and the Muslim League showed an early intolerance for the Khan brothers, and especially Ghaffar Khan, whose especial fraternal association with the Congress marked his anachronistic unsuitability for the emerging state narrative in Pakistan. He was imprisoned, his individuality and legacy ignored and erased from history books, and generations of Pakistanis have now grown up without any knowledge of that legendary figure and his anti-colonial movement in NWFP. Ghaffar Khan was cursed with a long life and only died in 1988, 40 years after Jinnah and Gandhi. His brother, Dr. Khan Sahib, was not the only provincial premier dismissed by Jinnah, though. The chief minister of Sindh, Muhammad Ayub Khurro, was shown the door in April 1948. Khurro had been concerned that the exodus of Hindu minorities from Sindh, complemented by the incoming muhajirs, or refugees, from different parts of India, would dilute the local Sindhi cultural identity. The reason for Khurro's departure was his alleged corruption and misconduct, but in the case of Punjab's chief minister, Iftikhar Hussain Khan of Mandot, there was nothing alleged about his unbelievably corrupt regime, which ended in January 1949, when he chose to resign rather than face proceedings for his self-serving handling of the refugee rehabilitation and resettlement plans. Collectively, these acts showed the thin emerging national layer overarching these regional spaces and undermined the fledgling politicians and fragile democratic structures. Instead, they strengthened the military, the bureaucracy and technocracy, and the religious establishment. Successive military dictators have depicted the politicians as capricious, corrupt, and motivated by self-interest, while projecting themselves as saviors of the nation. The ease of their success confirms the grain of genuineness in the charge, but that often came with setting the country's constitutional clock back to colonial-era laws and their preference for strong and centralized power levers. In the 6 years from the assassination of Liaquat, Pakistan saw 6 prime ministers, and by the summer of 1958, Defense Secretary turned President Iskander Mirza and his successor, General Ayub Khan, had separately telegraphed their intentions towards and preferences for a dictatorship to the American ambassador, then as until recently Pakistan's most valuable diplomatic relationship. While the general at the top functioned as a suitable public face, underneath a strong military establishment emerged, which spread its tentacles into numerous areas and key components of the economy. The Fauji Foundation was established in 1954 to provide employment and welfare benefits to ex-military personnel. Today, its cradle-to-grave character is clear from its involvement in items as disparate as cereals, gas, cement, oil, meats, fertilizer, and wind energy, to name a few. The Askari Bank, established in 1991, the Army Welfare Trust, established in 1971, the Evacuee Trust Property Board, established in 1960, and the Defense Housing Authority, operating in the major cities and often located in the wealthiest parts, all feed into a wider economy of the military-industrial complex. Aisha Siddique's Military Inc., 2007, provides an in-depth analysis of an elaborate system by which the military and its secret services operate and control vast swathes of Pakistan's economy. The military institution is intuitively invested in sustaining and maintaining itself by keeping an external threat, which is often India, alive, and which Aisha Jalal termed the political economy of defense. Cosmopolitan Karachi. Although the majority of the partition-related disturbances, murders and migration in 1947 to 1948 happened in Punjab, and a little later in 1949 to 1950, and beyond, for Bengal, the magnet for Muslim migrants from North India was Pakistan's first capital, Karachi. The quiet 18th-century pier and the quaint 19th-century metropolis located on international seaways and airways now underwent a total transformation. This one-time fishing village at the mouth of the Indus had come into prominence following the annexation of Sindh by the British East India Company in 1843. By the time Jinnah was born there in 1876, Karachi was a thriving commercial cosmopolitan port city, boasting one of the first tramway systems in South Asia. Opened by 1885, it only stopped operating in 1975. The 2 world wars saw the city's strategic value soar. By now, it was the capital of the youngest British Indian province of Sindh, and its local levers of political power and economic affluence were in the hands of Sindhi Hindus, even though as a whole its demography was majority Muslim. Above all, it nursed and cherished a Sindhi regional and linguistic identity that equally resisted Punjab's dominance in emerging Pakistan, as well as resented the incoming muhajirs. These millions of refugees who had made the ideological and existential journey of mind and body were received with a sullen ambivalence at best, and open hostility at worst, neither commensurate with their sacrifice nor with the expectations set in motion by the Pakistan movement. A considerable and sensitive strand in the partition literature shows the tragic refugee sacrifice, Muhajir Kabani, in Karachi and across Sindh. The entitlements felt by one group, North Indian Muslims, clashed with the expectations of another, local Sindhi Muslims. While the former had been at the forefront of the Pakistan movement from the beginning, the latter had shored up its spine in the end. Whose was the greater sacrifice for a homeland? Surely those who ultimately left, or were driven away from their ancestral homes and flocked to this new Medina. Arrival was not easily followed by assimilation, and over the years the local political conflict of Karachi coalesced around the Muhajir fault line as their demographic impact was substantial. In 1941, the population of Karachi had been 435,000. 10 years later, the numbers had soared to over 1 million, of which the Muhajirs comprised 55%, thereby making the local Sindhis a minority. Ultimately, in the 20 years between 1941 and 1961, Karachi's population grew by an astounding 432%, a staggering rate of growth which, as the geographer Oscar Speight exclaims, no other city anywhere else in the world at any time in human history has ever experienced. The fallout of this astounding growth was a heightened sense of regionalism in the 1950s, a decline in national politics in the 1960s, and labour unrest in the 1970s. By then, the Muhajirs had also organised, with the establishment of the All-Pakistan Muhajir Student Organisation, founded in 1978. It was the precursor to the Muhajir Qawmi movement, renamed Muttahida Qawmi Movement, MQM, in 1984, which was founded by Altaf Hussain to protect the rights of Muhajirs from a quota system that would reduce their access to opportunities, and argued that the Muhajirs constituted the fifth ethnic group in Pakistan. The MQM dominated the political landscape in Karachi from 1988, thanks to the successful mobilization of ethnic nationalism and militancy. This prompted the government of Pakistan in 1992 to send the military to Karachi to cleanse the city of anti-social elements, namely the MQM. Hussain fled to the UK, where he sought and received political asylum, but he continued with his political ambitions despite being implicated in the murder of a senior party member, Imran Farooq, in 2010. In August 2016, speaking from his North London base, Hussain lambasted Pakistan as a cancer for the entire world and the epicenter of terrorism. This call to incite his supporters into action led to horrific violence in Karachi, and despite the apology by Hussain a few days later, Farooq Sattar broke rank and the party split in 2017, with MQMP operating from Pakistan and Hussain controlling the MQM London party. The MQM's political growth coincided with and contributed to a period of immense political instability and violence in the city of Karachi. The late 1980s and especially the 1990s reduced Karachi to one of the most dangerous cities in the world, whose ordered disorder only began to stabilize following the military crackdown in 2013. Through these decades, it served as a destination for refugees fleeing the wars in Afghanistan and was flooded by the flotsam and jetsam of American weaponry meant for the Mujahids in Afghanistan. The wider, longer-term consequences of this were a society saturated with firearms and embroiled in drug trafficking and extortionist activities, real estate mafias, and politics by violence, giving rise to the term Kalashnikov culture. In 2016, Amjad Sabri, a popular Qawwali, Sufi devotional song singer, was shot dead in Karachi. He was targeted as a consequence of being caught up in the widespread violence, political and general, that has cursed the city. While the murder was widely condemned, it highlighted how deep the rot had penetrated. For Karachi to become the dual capital of Pakistan and the province of Sindh was not inevitable. Multan was in the running because it was located in the heart of Pakistan and, as seen previously, was an established, holier, and more historic city. There was some support for Dhaka in East Pakistan, but it had been peripheral in the Pakistan movement, and although a strong contender, Lahore was unfortunately badly affected by the chaos and violence following partition. Also, it was too close to the newly created border with India. Karachi, on the other hand, was relatively far away and calm. It offered opportunities to be connected to the outside world via sea and air, and had an existing infrastructure which could be expanded. Thus Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan leapt at the chance of turning Karachi into the capital of the new nation when the Sindh Muslim League offered. In turn, Hyderabad now became the regional capital of Sindh. This arrangement proved short-lived, and by 1959 Ayub Khan had announced that the capital would be shifted to the garrison city of Rawalpindi, while a twin city would be built nearby. It was a bold and dramatic move, and while Ayub found the tropical climate of Karachi unfavourable, moving the capital to the more sedate climate of the Margala Hills also allowed the military general headquarters, GHQ, to converge and converse closely with the new political capital, Islamabad. This City of Islam was designed by the Greek architect C.A. Doxiadis and funded by international organizations such as the Ford Foundation in America. It was a purpose-built, planned city that encapsulated the era of Khan's modernist vision for Pakistan, which was to be realized under the watchful eyes of the nearby military GHQ. This shift also finalized the break with the declining old guard of the pre-1947 Muslim League politics and crowned the domination of Punjabis and Pashtuns in the new political bureaucratic military nexus. Modern Karachi is politically peripheral, but remains at the core of commerce, trade, and cultural activities, a cosmopolitan melting pot of hope and aspiration for many who continue to flock to this great metropolis on the shores of the Arabian Sea. Bangladesh breaks away. Although Pakistan was imagined as a homeland for the Muslims of India, it was never a wholly Muslim country, nor did it encompass all Indian Muslims. Its 1951 census had yielded a combined population of 76 million, of which the majority, 42 million, lived in East Pakistan, Bengal. Almost 23% of this population were Bengali Hindus, while by contrast, West Pakistan only had a minority population of 3%. Although a greater number of Hindus initially remained in the Eastern Wing, by 1950 to 1951, it became clear that the upper and middle-class Hindu Bhadralok, genteel, preferred to migrate to India. This, in turn, created openings in the administrative services for educated Muslims in eastern India who were attracted to Dhaka, the new old capital of East Pakistan. Back in 1905, the division of British India's Bengal province had set a precedent for Dhaka's elevation as the provincial capital of the eastern part, a status which it soon lost when this partition was annulled in 1911. Now, in the early 1950s, although sharing the same faith, the two wings of Pakistan were unable to bridge the physical and the otherwise quite distinct linguistic, ethnic, cultural, climatic, and historical differences. From the beginning, then, Pakistan was faced with the challenges of first trying to keep two physically separate wings connected, and second, trying to construct a national Muslim identity from a population that was otherwise fragmented along linguistic, cultural, ethnic, and economic lines. United Province's Urdu-speaking elite, who had come to have close ties with the political establishment in Karachi upon their migration, and shared its attachment to a one-nation, one-culture, one-language policy, propelled the Constituent Assembly's rejection of Bangla or Bengali as a state language and its refusal to hold sessions in Dhaka. This was the trigger for Bengali alienation from Pakistan, which grew through the 1950s and to which other grievances, principally economic, became added. It would test the limits of the two-nation theory to its core, as the question persisted, was Islam sufficient to keep the two wings together? In March 1948, against the backdrop of rising agitation against this imposition of Urdu, Jinnah made his first and last trip to the eastern side of the country. Addressing an audience of 500,000 people at the Ramna Racecourse Maidan, Dhaka, he acknowledged the importance of East Bengal and how efforts were being made to ensure that East Pakistan attains its full stature with the maximum speed. He claimed that Pakistan overall had done much to ensure that minorities were protected during these difficult times, despite evidence to the contrary. His speech reflected the early anxiety and insecurity felt by the fragile state, with references to enemies of the state, subversive elements, communists, and fifth columnists, all conspiring to divide and destroy this new homeland. But above all, to the crowd's disbelief, the speech, delivered in English and addressed to a Bengali audience, reaffirmed Urdu as the state language. Urdu, of course, was not just a lingua franca, it was symbolically and ideologically attached to the Pakistan movement. For a singular national identity to emerge, the political leadership felt that there should be one national language, but the reality on the ground was that this flowery language of poetry and pathos, written in flowing Persian calligraphy, was only spoken by the small elite from the United Provinces, now the ruling class and based in Karachi, who had imagined and articulated this project. The protests were swift. Civic unrest escalated, and by 1952 the Urdu-Bengali controversy was at boiling point, despite the assent of a Bengali Governor-General, Khawaja Nazimuddin, for the whole of Pakistan as Jinnah's successor. Nazimuddin, despite being Bengali, inflamed the language debate by defending the Urdu-only policy. Maulana Bhashani, co-founder of the Muslim Awami League, established in 1949, warned the West Pakistani leadership against the imposition of Urdu and was already demanding independence. The unlawful assembly of demonstrators under Section 144, centered around the University of Dhaka, ended in confrontations with the police on the 21st of February 1952. Over the next few days, the demonstrators grew to thousands, with the authorities using tear gas and firing to suppress the young student protesters. Officially, 5 martyrs are commemorated on this day. Unofficially, the numbers were most likely higher. The government blamed Hindus, communists, and others plotting against the state, rather than rectifying the genuine grievances. Since the year 2000, in recognition of these events, the 21st of February is observed by the United Nations as the International Mother Language Day to highlight and celebrate linguistic diversity. The intensity of these language riots showed up the interregional and intra-communal fault line in Pakistan's early demographic composition. It dwarfed in symbolism and long-term significance the Liaquat-Nehru Pact of 1950, signed between India and Pakistan, with a mutually reinforcing aim to protect the rights of religious minorities in their midst. It reflected the genuine concerns that the Bengalis, Hindus and Muslims harboured about becoming the inferior other in Pakistan, starting with losing state recognition and patronage of their proud regional vernacular, captured by prolific writers such as Shamsur Rahman and Qazi Nazrul Islam, who became the national poet of Bangladesh. In 1954, the one-unit program was launched by PM Muhammad Ali Bogra, becoming implemented by PM Chowdhury Muhammad Ali on the 14th of October 1955. The program significantly sought to merge the 4 provinces of the Western Wing to outmatch East Pakistan for administrative purposes. In 1954, elections took place in East Pakistan, in which the Muslim League was defeated at the hands of the United Front, led by the former Prime Minister of Bengal, A.K. Fazlul Huq's Krishak Shramrik Party, Farmer Labour Party, and Maulana Bhashani's Awami League. It would turn out to be a turbulent year in the trajectory of United Pakistan, with industrial unrest and labour riots in the east, blamed upon enemy agents by the West-based central government, which imposed direct rule. This authoritarian attitude of Karachi towards Dhaka set the template for future transactions until the unmaking of this united Pakistan 15 years later. With the creation of the one unit to counter East Pakistan, issues of domination and representation only became starker, even as, in 1956, Karachi relented and gave Bengali official recognition. By then, the physical separation and emotional distance between the two wings were becoming worse through growing economic disparity, which would culminate in a conflict over state sovereignty and the very meaning of nationhood. Soon, insult was to be added to this injury by Ayub Khan and his military ilk, who were quasi-racist in their scathing dismissal of the East Bengalis, formerly under subjugation until Pakistan was created, and regarded as still under the influence of an effeminate Hindu culture and language, hence their reluctance to embrace a more martial Islamic identity, as evident in the Western Wing. The arrogance and prejudice, disdain and discrimination for the Eastern Province was not just visible in the racialized language used, but was starkly apparent in who was controlling the purse strings and the narrative around national identity. For many, East Pakistan was merely a colony. The Western Province dominated the political, bureaucratic, and military class, while much of the economy in the early days was heavily dependent on the jute exports from the eastern side. One of the largest jute processing factories in the world was located in the suburbs of Dhaka, but was owned by the Adamji family in the Western Wing. Insofar as investment, infrastructure, and welfare went, there was a stark indifference to East Pakistan, neglect, and what amounted almost to neo-colonialism. Between 1950 and 1970, the ratio of government spending between West and East wings was estimated to be 70-30. In 1966, the Bengali politicians put together a 6-point program seeking a federal constitution, convertible currencies, power to tax and spend, separate foreign exchange reserve, and separate paramilitary forces, especially navy, given the long coastline in the east. Drafted, amongst others, by Rehman Subhan and Nurul Islam, the proposal for greater provincial autonomy was rejected by politicians in West Pakistan and those not aligned to the Awami League. The disparity between the two wings was evident in the military administrator's response when the deadly Bola cyclone ravaged the southern districts of East Pakistan on the 12th of November 1970, killing an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 people. The failure to respond with immediacy, declaring a national emergency, and the lack of adequate relief only confirmed the wider feelings of neglect and exploitation felt in the Eastern Wing. Under the clouds of growing instability, following transition from one military dictator to another, the first national elections took place in December 1970. They were scheduled to take place on the 5th of October, but were postponed due to floods. The results showed a resounding victory for the East Pakistan-based Awami League and its leader, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. The party fought on the 6 points program and won 160 out of the 300 seats, representing 39% of the popular vote. However, the West Pakistan-based Pakistan People's Party, led by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, which won 81 seats, refused to recognize these results. The incumbent regime of General Yahya Khan attempted to foster an agreement between the two parties, even as the situation on the ground was deteriorating towards a civil war. Attempting to protect the army as the savior once again, Operation Searchlight began from March 1971 under the pretext of checking outbreaks of anti-Bihari violence by East Bengalis. Over the summer of 1971, the Pakistan Army systematically targeted pro-independent supporters in Dhaka and the Bengal countryside, killing a generation of students, academics, workers, committing mass rapes against women, atrocities against minorities, and leaving deep scars across a region and soon to be a nation. Typically, there can be little agreement on how many died, with the Bangladeshis putting this figure at 3 million. As ever, the real brunt of the brutality unleashed that year, told through women's testimonies, the silent sufferers in this human tragedy, is being narrated only now, the 50th year of Bangladesh's birth. By the monsoon autumn of 1971, approximately 9 million refugees had fled across the border into India, and, with consequent Indian intervention, the year ended in the Third India-Pakistan War that culminated in the creation of Bangladesh in December 1971. As the political commentator Tariq Ali remarks, the two-nation theory formulated in the middle-class living rooms of Uttar Pradesh was buried in the Bengali countryside. The bloody stains of this spectral wound and brutal genocide have left an indelible mark on the subcontinent, and Bangladesh was in many ways the definitive, unfinished business of partition. It would take until February 1974 for the 90,000 Pakistani prisoners of war to return home and Pakistan to give diplomatic recognition to Bangladesh. This came on an occasion which portended the Islamic turn that the country would take, as PM Bhutto received and feted Sheikh Mujib, along with 36 other heads of state from among the major Muslim nations of the world in Lahore that month. Addressing a packed Lahore television studio, a visibly emotional Bhutto declared in Urdu, "In the name of Allah, and on behalf of the peoples of this country, I declare that we are recognizing Bangladesh." In retrospect, perhaps it was inconceivable that two such disparate provinces could exist as one country, despite the technological advances made in the 20th century, without a true spirit of accommodation and power-sharing. From that viewpoint, it is in fact remarkable that they managed to do so for almost 25 years. Although Pakistan began from an institutionally weak position, it was this breakup of the two wings that led formerly West Pakistan towards a path not envisioned by the Qaid-e-Azim. Pakistan now entered a new Islamic phase of its history, armed with another constitution, 1973, to meet another existential crisis. Rather than embrace and celebrate diversity under the elected Bhutto and the dictator General Zia-ul-Haq, the regime once again opted for the opposite. Its aim now was for a totally homogeneous Islamic identity around its majority Sunni faith, Persianized Urdu, and Arabified idioms.